Hello. Let's see if people start joining. Hello. Yay, people are joining. Hi. Hello. I am Kate Elizabeth Russell, the author of My Dark Vanessa, and I'm going to wait just a few minutes to let other people join, and then Alice is going to hop on this Instagram live, and we're going to talk about the novel. But yeah, so I was supposed to be in London for this event, for the launch event of My Dark Vanessa, and of course that was canceled, as was everyone's book events, and all events for everything were canceled, and that's okay, because what's happening in the world is bigger than... Let me see if I can... Hopefully the connection stays good. But yeah, really happy to be doing this, because we can still all stay connected, despite being cooped up and physically separated. So yeah, so happy to do this. Maybe we'll wait another minute or so, and then I'll have Alice hop on, and then we'll start talking about the book. But I hope everyone's doing okay, and you're not feeling too stir crazy, and that you all have access to food. The grocery store near me has been fully stocked, which is really reassuring. But yeah, I hope everyone's doing okay. Okay, so maybe I'll get Alice to come on.
Works. I've never hosted an Instagram live before.
Hey, that was like a tense 5 minutes.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. This is great. And we have an audience. All I want to do is just like chat with you, but we have an audience.
So we have to remember that. Okay, so before we start, I just want to say hi, everyone. My name's Alice Slater. I'm coming live from London, ready to chat to Kate about her incredible new book, My Dark Vanessa, which is out in the UK tomorrow. You can see you've got your little comment box at the bottom. Feel free to ask questions, and at the end, we will ask some audience questions as well. So it's not just going to be me and Kate. Okay, bro, let's do this.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, a really obvious question for you, but what's it like launching your debut in the middle of a global pandemic?
Yeah, it's surreal. So my US launch happened the day before it was declared a pandemic. And so I was able to have a launch event in Brooklyn, and then everything started being canceled. So that's disappointing, but at the same time, this is it's so much bigger than a single book. It's bigger than any of us. So easy to keep perspective in that way.
And I guess you've now had the opportunity to get very used to doing these like very strange digital live events.
Yeah, which I'm really grateful for, that we're able to still sort of do these things. But at the same time, it's a little weird. It's just weird. It's weird for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go right back to the book. Where did the spark for My Dark Vanessa come from?
Yeah. So I worked on the book for such a long time, it's sort of hard to say exactly where the spark came from. But I mean, I read Lolita when I was 14, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it in a way that sort of had to do with me as a young writer reading a novel and thinking like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever read. But I also was a 14-year-old girl reading Lolita. And so I, of course, identified with the story. I identified with the character of Dolores in a way that is certainly problematic, like looking back on it, but it made a lot of sense to me at the time. I saw that book as insight into how the world works, and even insight into like the male psyche. Like, this is what men think. This is what men want. This is what, you know, this is what heterosexuality is, even, which is, again, really troubling. But I also was growing up in the late 90s and early aughts when the Lolita trope was so prevalent in our culture. And so this message was sort of being reinforced from all sides. So I traced the sort of seed of the idea for the novel back to discovering Lolita at that age and sort of internalizing it in a fairly intense way. But then I just kept working on the novel. I studied creative writing as an undergraduate and as a master's student, and then as a doctoral student. And so I just worked on it throughout the years.
And how do you think the book would differ if it had been picked up when you were in your early 20s?
It would have been really romanticized. The way that Vanessa views the relationship when she's a teenager, and even in her 30s, but especially as a teenager, where she views it as a love story. She sees it as dark. She sees it as intense and complicated, but she sees it as a love story that doesn't necessarily fit into these ideas of trauma or abuse. That's how it would have been written if it had been published in my early 20s. And I'm really grateful that I didn't manage to finish it at that age, because I think I would have regretted it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. Especially because the world is very different now.
Right.
And how did the particularly hashtag MeToo, how did that affect the way that you wrote the book?
It didn't, it did and it didn't affect it. So I started working on this present day plot line of another student coming forward and accusing the teacher of abuse in 2014, 2015. So that was already written and in place when MeToo started happening. But when MeToo did start happening, first I didn't know what to do, because it kind of freaked me out, because they were aligning in this, what I was writing and what was happening culturally aligned in this way that felt surreal, and it freaked me out. I didn't know how to make sense of it. But then I tried to view MeToo as an opportunity to trust the reader more, to trust that the reader would understand why someone would wait so long to come forward, maybe why someone wouldn't want to come forward at all. And so how MeToo ended up changing that present day plotline was Taylor, the other student who comes forward. In the earlier drafts, it was just her one voice speaking out. But then I opened it up a little bit, so she's speaking out in the context of a movement. And then some of the scenes with Vanessa and her therapist, I wrote those in a way where Vanessa's sort of engaging with these criticisms of MeToo, right? She's sort of parroting the things that Strain has said about the idea of all these women coming forward and speaking out. So there was some revision. It definitely made me look at that present day plotline differently, but at the same time, the core of the novel was already there. Yeah.
And did you find it challenging skipping between those two voices, like the adult Vanessa and the teenage Vanessa?
Yeah, I wrote them separately. So the present day plotline when Vanessa's 32, I wrote that was the last thing I wrote. And all of the past plotline was already done. It wasn't until I had a complete draft that was really sort of polished and at the point where it just needed line editing that I was able to work on it all the way through, because otherwise it would have been too hard, just way too hard to switch back and forth, because there's such, the psychologies I think are pretty different, Vanessa's psychology in each of those plot lines, and also like the prose itself is fairly different, at least in my mind. Maybe for the reader the difference isn't.
That's why it was something I was so interested in, because they're such distinct voices, but so still clearly coming from the same person.
Right.
It made me wonder as well, like obviously we met on LiveJournal, our home for our teenage and early adult years. Did you ever revisit your own diaries as a young woman to kind of capture that voice?
Absolutely. Especially, I want to say in like 2014, 2015, I went through like a few month period of just going back and rereading old entries, and it was really helpful, but also really cringy. Like I remember just being like, oh my god, like shielding my eyes from the screen, because just like reading your 20-year-old self is painful. But I'm so grateful. To have that sort of archive that is easily searchable. Like it's different from having just a paper journal, because if you have like these digital entries, you can sort of sort through them really quickly and efficiently, which is
like
weird.
Find stuff that you might want to reference, or like
yeah. It's good and bad. Like it can be really seductive just like sitting there and reading through old entries, which isn't always helpful or healthy.
Would you ever consider publishing any?
What?
For a laugh, would you ever consider publishing any?
Oh my god. I mean, yes, but I feel like it would get me in trouble.
It's something to think about when you come to write your memoir.
I don't think I can stick to truth. I can't. Everything turns to fiction. Everything does.
I kind of love that though, like that completely kind of unquenchable desire to kind of mythologize everything. And I feel like that's something that happens to Vanessa as well. Like she is, as the plot unfolds, she is already creating her own fiction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so her tendency to do that, I think, is like really rooted in my tendency to write fiction. And it's one of the great, I think, one of the most heartbreaking things about the story, I think, is that Vanessa stops writing. And she doesn't, she sees herself as a poet, and then she like goes to college. So it is similar to me, but she sort of lets that go. She doesn't hold on to it. Whereas, I very much did. But at the same time, Vanessa is sort of focusing that creative energy in rewriting this relationship with Strain, even as it's happening.
And you just said similar to you in terms of her writing. Did you ever consider giving her a different passion just to try and like create more of a distance between writer and character?
I did, but I never knew what to land on. And it was important for me for Strain to be an English teacher too, because I wanted to have that setting of the literature classroom where he's, sort of bringing in these texts that speak to her and speak to their situation. And I think literature classrooms, English teachers, they can create this environment that's really, really emotionally charged. And that was important to me. So it made sense for her to be like bookish and an aspiring poet in that way. But with the new project that I'm working on, which is in really, really early stages. I'm working on this character who is very, very creative, but more of a visual artist. And that's like really sort of exhilarating and a real relief to be able to write someone who is really still creative, but really different from me.
I just want to quickly say, I'm sorry if anyone is having difficulty hearing us. I've had a little note saying that there's some feedback. I unfortunately have the kind of iPhone where I can't plug in headphones or speakers, but thank you for bearing with us. We'll try and talk slowly and clearly. Hopefully that will solve the issues as much as we can. Okay, so you just mentioned that you started something else. This was going to be one of my last questions, but I'm just going to bring it forward. Having spent so long with Vanessa, how hard was it to begin another project and get to know a new voice?
It's a lot less difficult than I expected it to be. Like, I was so scared. I was so scared of it because I did spend so long on this book, and it was a real sort of anxiety. Like, would I be able to write anything else, or is this it? And that question, would I be able to have the same interest level in another character, in another story? And I mean, like I said, I'm in the early stages, so I am sort of feeling a little like superstitious about this new idea, and a little like sort of, I don't want to spook it and scare it away, but I am excited about it. And it's a lot of it, I don't know, I'm trying to find a lot of comfort in the idea that like my obsessions are my obsessions, and I'm going to keep returning to them no matter what. And it's going well, which is weird. It's not, I'm such a like pessimist and sort of apocalyptic thinker that I'm sort of just stunned at how excited I am about this new idea, but like, I'm just gonna roll with it.
I was about to say, like, and I'm sure everyone else is as well, but of course My Dark Vanessa has only just come out in the UK, so everyone still has a whole other book to enjoy before they can even start badgering more. So in terms of the subject matter of My Dark Vanessa, obviously it's quite controversial. Have you worried about how it will land and how audiences will respond to it?
Not really. I mean, maybe more like right now, just because the anxieties are higher of like, oh my God, it's coming out and people are reading it and like reviews are being posted. And so you want, you know, of course you want everything to be positive and, you know, for everyone to love it. So that's, you know, impossible. So there's more on my mind now, but it certainly wasn't when I was writing it, because I was just writing it for me. I didn't have a book deal. I had no real, my dream was for it to be published, but I never really had a lot of confidence in the idea that it ever would be. But it comes down to the subject matter. I think like the subject matter is going to be met with controversy no matter what, because it's really difficult. When you write about sexual abuse, I think you're going to elicit intense emotional reactions, and understandably so. And so I think it was inevitable in that regard, but also I think some of the controversy might stem from Vanessa being a difficult character who engages with her own abuse in a way that some readers might find shocking or at least unfamiliar. But at the same time, I keep getting so many messages from people who are like, oh my God, this was my story. Like, Vanessa is me. This happened to me, or this happened to my friend. And so I know that there's truth in the novel. It's just maybe not a truth that we've heard that much. And sometimes that can be met with controversy.
Because it's uncomfortable. And
yeah.
It's something that it's definitely an idea that there hasn't really been given much space for, I feel, anyway. But I guess that's, you know, whenever you're saying something that people maybe don't necessarily want to hear, it's bound to create a bit of a stir.
Yeah.
What do you kind of hope that stir could cause? Like, what if you had to wish anything for the book and how it lands, what would it be?
I hope I mean, I hope people read it. I hope people read it and talk about it. Because I think, I think if a book sparks strong opinions, strong reactions, then the thing to do is to discuss it. And so that's what I hope that people walk away from the book wanting to do. But at the same time, I do hope that this book makes room for other stories that are similar or deal with similar subject matter, but approach it in different ways, to show, that people want to engage with this material, and they want to engage with it when it's presented in a way that isn't just black and white or isn't oversimplified, but that is really complicated, and maybe even risky, to show that people want to read that.
Yeah, like there's an interest and a thirst, not just for like the subject matter itself, but more like for that self-reflection as well.
Yeah.
So on the internet in general, I think it was on Instagram, you've been sharing a soundtrack. I'd love to know a little bit about things that aren't books that have influenced Vanessa and the texture of the writing.
Yes, music, a huge thing, huge. And that sort of playlist soundtrack that I've been sort of sharing and sort of explaining song by song on my Instagram, that is an adapted playlist from, there was one that I listened to while I was working on the book, and I sort of reworked that into a playlist that sort of loosely follows the plot of the novel. I got obsessive about it, but that's a huge influence because I would listen to that playlist while I was doing things other than writing. Like, I listened to it while I was writing, but I also listened to it when I was walking, or when I was like cleaning my house, or I'm a big pacer. Like, when I'm thinking, I just like pace around my apartment, and when I was like trying to work out a scene away from the page, but just like trying to work it out in my head, I would often like pace while listening to specific songs. So hugely influential. But also film, like finding movies that dealt with similar themes was always a big thing, always a big thing for me. And to a lesser extent, I think TV shows as well, but music was always like the number one thing.
And do you think it was a sign from the universe that Fiona Apple dropped a new album?
Absolutely, like 100%, because everything revolves around my Dark Vanessa. No, she was like the patron saint, like hovering over the entire writing process of the novel. And yeah, she's very dear to me.
Very dear to your heart. So will you have to put your soundtrack down now that you're working on something else? Will it distract you?
Yeah, it does actually, but I started making a new one for the next book. So that's like, it's interesting how as soon as I start working on something new, I'm like, well, gotta make a playlist. Like, I can't write without it.
Okay, so I'd love to know a little bit about your process. Once the book was finished and you started approaching agents, how long did that take for you? Because I hear it was not a smooth ride.
No, yeah, it took a long time, but I was expecting it to take a long time. But when I tell other people how long it took, they're like, what, really? So it took 5 months of pretty much constant querying, which is when you like email an agent and you say, like, I have this book, this is sort of what it's about, here are comparable titles, will you read it? So I did that for 5 months, and I kept a spreadsheet. So I know I queried 66 agents before I got an offer of rep. 66, which I like is a lot, but at the same time, I'd heard from other writers who'd gone through that experience who had queried twice as many agents and then completely struck out. So I was prepared for it to take that long. And I still ended up in a really fortunate position where I still had multiple offers, because once I got one, I let all the other agents know who had the manuscript, and then I had multiple offers. But once it was submitted to editors, I was expecting it to sort of follow suit, where it would take a long time, and it would be months until I heard anything. But once it was submitted to editors, it moved really, really, really quickly. It felt a little like whiplash in that way.
Yeah. And at any point, did you consider shelving it, or did you stick with it for those 5 months?
Yeah, there was one point, I would say about like 4 months in, that I said to my husband, like, if I don't get an agent by October, and I think it was like August at that point, or July or August, if I don't get one by October, I need to stop, because it's just so painful, like the rejection. Because when you query agents, the rejection comes in the form, most of the time, of silence. Like, you just never hear anything back, which is just so, it's like you're throwing your heart into a void, right? And you're never getting anything back. And that's tough. That was really disheartening. Like, I was thinking, if I struck out with agents, then I'd submit to some small publishers who don't require agents. But then I was also like, screw it, I'll just self-publish it and like distribute it to my friends who watched me work on this for so many years, and they'd love to read it. So there was never a point where I even imagined it like being a quote unquote big book. It wasn't even a thought in my head. My expectations were very low.
Yeah. Can't be disappointed that way, I suppose.
Exactly.
What would your advice be then to someone in the same position with a finished manuscript? How do you even begin dealing with that emotional process?
It's tough. It's really tough. And I think you do fare better if you have a thick skin, but that's easier said than done, but I don't think you can go wrong by expecting rejection, because the likelihood is you are going to be rejected over and over and over again, and you're going to feel like nobody cares about this thing you worked on for years of your life, and maybe there isn't a place for it in the world. But I think perseverance is incredibly important, not just for the sake of sticking with it, but for sticking with it and learning along the way. And that's sort of how I look back on my process, that all of the failed drafts, all the failed attempts at sort of getting this novel written, I do feel like it led me to the point where I was able to realize, like, oh no, this book, it should be written from only Vanessa's point of view, and it should be close first person, and it should be written the way that it ended up being written. And I'm not sure I could have ever arrived at that point if I hadn't had all those failures along the way. And so I think of that in terms of perseverance, if that makes sense.
So I'm going to ask one more question before I'm going to open it up to our audience. I know some questions have been filtering through, but we'll see what we get. My last question is just, did you change it much between each submission? Or was it finished? Did you leave it?
When I was querying agents?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty much finished. I mean, I did tinker with it. Like, I was a little maybe over eager when I first started querying. Like, I had a finished draft, and they always say, like, you should start sending it out to agents once you feel like you've taken the manuscript as far as you possibly could. And so I felt that way, and then I started querying, and then, a couple weeks later, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I could like rework that scene a little bit, or that scene a little bit. And so I did sort of, polish it up in different ways, but there weren't any major changes. It was pretty much set from the point that I started letting agents look at it. And it didn't really change that much before it was submitted to editors too. My agent and I, we did one light edit. Yeah. I want to say like one line edit before it gets submitted to editors.
Okay. So let's just see if our friends at Fourth Estate have any questions for us? Well, for you. Okay, I'm just going to drop in one from Becca Parkinson. The UK cover is really striking. What did you think when you first saw it?
Oh, it's so beautiful, so beautiful. And it's similar, here's the UK cover. It's similar to the galleys that were designed like over a year ago, with this red hair and then like the plate on the back. And as soon as I saw those, I was like completely in love with them. So I was so happy to see that the final cover sort of used that same design. And the color scheme is so beautiful. I love the blue, and the hardcover, it's like the same, that bright blue. It's so pretty. Love it. And it's so different from the US one. And I love that they're different.
The US is a black and white cover, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. With like purple.
Right there.
Yeah, and it's sort of like purple and gray instead. But I love them both. They're my children. I love them equally.
Okay, so I've got a question that's come through from Fourth Estate from Eve Rose Edie's, which is, what was the inspo behind the title, My Dark Vanessa?
Yes, so the title, My Dark Vanessa, comes from a line in Pale Fire, which is another novel by Vladimir Nabokov. And that line, so Pale Fire is in the form of a long poem and then a series of footnotes. And My Dark Vanessa is taken from the poem. And so there's like that layer of meaning. And then also a dark Vanessa is a type of butterfly, which is depicted on the US cover. It's like this butterfly is a dark Vanessa. And then also another layer of meaning. The name Vanessa was created by the writer Jonathan Swift, and it was a nickname that he gave a younger woman who was in love with him and was one of his students, by taking part of her first name and part of her last name, fusing them together and creating this name Vanessa. So there's a lot of subtext, I guess, going on with the title, and it fit really well.
Was she called Vanessa before you found all the subtext?
Yes, which is crazy, right? So I was in college. I want to say it was like my sophomore year of college that I decided on the name Vanessa because I liked it. And also I had a LiveJournal friend who was named Vanessa, and I thought she was great. And I'm like, oh, what a great name. And then I discovered like the history behind the name and the origin of it. And saw it in my copy of Pale Fire, and it felt like, oh my God, this is all like meant to be. It felt fated. And I tried to like incorporate that feeling of it seeming like destiny into the actual text of My Dark Vanessa, when Strain tells Vanessa, like, this is the origin of your name, like you were made for this. But yeah, it did feel a little like fate in that way.
Ethically, yes, serendipitous.
Yeah.
So I have another question here from I Am Jenny Rooney. She'd like to know where we can read anything else that you've written.
Oh God. I bet if you dig, you could find stuff. I do have, like, I published short stories for years, really. A lot of them just in like print journals with the, maybe there's like 50 copies out in the world, but there are a couple of online pieces, including one in a journal called Necessary Fiction that was published, I think, in 2015 or 2016, that features earlier versions of Vanessa and Strain. So if you look up Kate Russell Necessary Fiction, you could read like an early iteration of these two.
I feel like any writers need to go and do that. That's your homework assignment. You need to read My Dark Vanessa, and then you need to go and read that short fiction. Okay, so I've had another question come through. This is from RCP35, and they'd like to know if you have any tips for creating a sense of realness when writing about fictional events.
For me, I mean, I feel like once I start talking like this, I get sort of like it sounds like new agey and sort of like mystical, but so much of the writing process for My Dark Vanessa sort of hinged on my ability to have Vanessa be almost like a filter in my mind. So everything I watched, everything I listened to, everything I read was sort of experienced through her. And so I really tried as much as I could to see the world through her eyes. And I think that infused a lot of realness into the writing. But at the same time, I don't think that's something that you could force. And for me, it's a matter of finding a character that I feel so connected with that I'm able to, or even want to, tap into their sort of psychology to that level. So I don't know how helpful that is, but any way that you can try to sort of incorporate the thinking and the motivations of whatever character it is you're working with, then I think the more real and authentic your fiction is going to read. Especially if you're writing character-based stuff. If you're not, then I'm not sure. that's not my forte.
Yeah, sticking in your lane. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had some questions come through the Waterstones account earlier today as well, so I'm going to ask you one of those. One here from Gloria Bristow is, did you ever get writer's block? And if so, how did you deal with it?
I don't really get writer's block, which might sound infuriating, but it's just I have such a habit of writing every day that like I just do it. And so I mean, certainly there are phases in which the writing that I'm doing is just bad and not useful and just like total garbage, but it's still sort of, I'm always producing. But I try to think of my writing process as something that's cyclical. Like sometimes it's going to go really, really well, and that might last for weeks or even months at a time, but then there will be other stretches of time when it's just not happening, and that's okay, because I need to recharge my brain, I need to recharge my creativity. But as long as I'm sort of sitting down and still in the habit of making time to get words on the page, then it's going to come back. And so just like having faith in the process itself, in my own abilities, that is that's sort of the thing that keeps those anxieties at bay that might come up when you are in a stretch of time when it's not coming out well, or you don't feel inspired or what have you. Just sort of really believing that it's going to come back because it's in you. You just need to rest your brain a little bit sometimes for months. That's okay.
And did you even find that, like, moving between projects from My Dark Vanessa to your current project, did you still manage to keep writing, like, regularly?
Yes and no. I try to be really generous with myself with what constitutes writing, which part of that I think is from like online journaling for so many years. Like all of those entries that I wrote are just as real and valid as pieces of writing as the seminar papers that I was writing or the stories for workshop. And so I think sometimes we end up talking about writing as though it's this like thing that you have to like sit down at your perfectly curated desk and the light has to be a certain way, and then you like open the document and you're writing. But writing can also be like half passed out on the couch and you get an idea and you like open up the notes app on your phone. Like to me that's still writing, or even writing an Instagram post, or it's about sort of translating your thoughts into words in whatever way that happens.
Sashley7 has a question. They would like to know what you're reading right now.
I am reading, I think I have like books strewn around me right now. I'm reading this. I'm like slowly working my way through it. So this is the Diaries of Marie, and I can never pronounce her last name. It's Russian. Austin should come like running in here to correct me, my husband who speaks Russian. Bashkirtsev, Bashkirtsev, she was a teenage diarist in the Russian Empire in, I think, the 1800s. Incredible. She's like so full of herself, convinced that she's a genius. The name of this collection of her entries is literally "I am the most interesting book of all." So she has like so much swagger, and it reads as so like contemporary and brilliant. And so I'm like slowly making my way through that. And I'm also reading a arc of a novel that's coming out in the US, I think in August, and it's called Talking Animals by Joni Murphy. And it's about, it's like this reimagined New York where like there are no humans, only animals living in like a capitalist society. And the protagonist is an alpaca who I think works at the DMV. I just started it, but it's brilliant. And it's this like amazing capitalist critique. And it's, sort of heartening right now when the world is kind of upside down. Reading a book about revolutionary animals. Why not?
Like reading a book where the world is really upside down. Like,
yeah,
it can
exactly.
get more upside down.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we're gonna grab another one from the Waterstones account. Okay, here's a good one. Right now, are you reading or are you writing more? This is from Ari Sarhang.
I would say about half and half. It's pretty even, though my writing, because I'm in such the early stages of this new project that my writing is sort of like haphazard. It's more like notes and sketching out ideas rather than writing like actual scenes. And my reading is sort of sporadic too. I think partly just from doing so much work for My Dark Vanessa still, and also like the world being so crazy and just like trying to adjust to it. I'm having a hard time concentrating. So both the reading and the writing are sort of coming out in spurts, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like whatever you can get is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being gentle with myself. We should all be gentle and generous with ourselves right now.
If we can't now, when can we?
Right, exactly.
I can't quite see who asked it, but someone has just asked you to repeat the title of the book that you're currently reading.
Talking Animals by Joni Murphy is the art.
So that was the fiction.
That's the fiction. And then this is, like, I think this is, I got this used somewhere. I think it might still be in print, but this is called I Am the Most Interesting Book of All it's the Volume 1 of the Diary of Marie Bashkirtsev. Of course, that's what I'm thinking, right?
Okay, here's one for you from Jessa TL Girl. I'm sorry, my eyesight, even wearing glasses, I'm like squinting at the screen. The question is, how did you get into writing to begin with?
It totally was just something that I was driven towards as a kid. I first started writing stories, I want to say when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I remember I was in elementary school and I made my own book with cardboard and like wallpaper, made a cover. It was about a horse that got taken from its mother and joined the circus. It was very sad. But my school like put it in the library. They put like a little checkout like card in the back. So like I was that kid. But I started writing fiction seriously, in that like I started doing it every day. I'd say when I was around 12 years old, just because I was doing it. It was like my favorite thing.
I love that your school was like, we'll put it in the library. I feel like it's going to be a big name. Would you just love to see how many times it got checked out?
I think when I graduated from 4th grade, they gave it to my mother. So I think my mother is in possession of this ridiculous book.
Okay, well, I look forward to the Instagram live where you do a dramatic reading for us. Okay, so we have one more question. This was from Dance Between the Lines, and they would like to know, aside from Lolita, what other books inspired the writing process of My Dark Vanessa?
Yeah, Many. But the ones that sort of come to my mind immediately is one, a play by the writer or the playwright David Harrower. The play's called Blackbird, and it was published I think in the early 2000s, and there was a revival of it on Broadway starring Jeff Daniels and Michelle Williams a couple years ago that was supposed to be incredible. But this play, it's about these two characters, a man in his 50s, a woman in her early 20s, and they had a relationship when she was 12 and he was in his 40s, and their relationship was discovered. He went to jail, and then got out and started a new life for himself, changed his name, and she has tracked him down, and she's sort of confronting him and making him sort of explain why he did what he did. And that play, it just like throws you into the emotions of that situation. And it's so interesting too, because he's a character who had quote unquote paid his debt to society, but that doesn't mean anything to her. Like, her pain is still completely unresolved, and that was so interesting to me, so interesting. And then another text that I point to is Elizabeth Strout's debut novel, Amy and Isabel, that was published in the late 90s, and it takes place in Maine, like my book. She's from Maine, like me. And Amy and Isabel is this gorgeous novel, and sort of central to it is a relationship between a teenage girl and a high school teacher. And so it was really sort of formative for me, both in the setting and in that plot line. And so those are the two that sort of come to my mind immediately when I think of texts that were influential. One from the very, very beginning, and then I read Blackbird, I want to say in like 2015. So they sort of bookend the writing process in that way.
And you have published a whole list, because there are loads, aren't there? Because obviously it was your you did a dissertation on this, so yeah, there's on your website, right?
Yes. Everything from like essays about Britney Spears to like Freud and like Agamben and like ridiculous like literary like critical theory. So whatever you're interested in, I'm sure there's something on that reading list that might speak to you.
And just to clarify for this person, Write Fire with Fire, it was Blackbird was the play?
Blackbird, yeah. It's incredible. Everyone should read it.
Okay, so listen, it is 7:17 in the UK. I think I'm going to call time on this beautiful chat. So first of all, everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for joining us. Here it is. It's out tomorrow. I'm sure Waterstones are brimming with copies. Obviously, you can't go into stores right now, but they can still send them to you. So you can order from waterstones.com. Please do. It's incredible, and I can't wait for everyone to read it. Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
What a pleasure.
Yes.
All right.
This was great.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Best of luck. I hope it sells loads. Bye.
Me too.